Are video games too long? Yes. Just kidding. Not really, but kind of. So recently, a former Sony executive called for the return to the 12 to 15 hour game, citing the ability to finish more games and a better discipline for editing, similar to a piece of literature or a movie. He also referenced the production costs of larger games and that increasing those costs into the future would adversely affect the industry as a whole. And I agree, kind of. To be honest, as a gamer, I really suck at finishing video games. I am very guilty of always being on the hunt for a new game and completely ignoring my back catalog. Now that I think of it, I haven't finished a full game front to back since we've had children. Wow. That's crazy. Now, I see every game purchase as a little gamble. I'm exchanging money for entertainment, and I don't know if I'm gonna fully get my money's worth from that product. And even more so than other mediums, there's a lot of games that I really enjoy but will never play again. And now a $60 gamble is a lot bigger of an investment than a $20 gamble, especially when the promise is just longer gameplay. That's just another commitment that you have to be concerned about. You know, I sometimes hear jokes about certain games that are long and tedious that it's just cruel to gift to someone because then they're obligated to play that game. And some games legitimately feel like work. And if you calculate your hourly rate for when you're working, is that game's value equal to that dollar amount that you would be theoretically missing out on? Now, this topic came more into focus after The Last of Us 2 came out, a game I personally have not played because I sold my PS4. The game clocks in at 2 to 3 times the length of the original and took over 6 years in development. I heard countless people talking about thinking they were witnessing the ending of the game several times with still hours of gameplay left to go, not realizing that it was still continuing and even being satisfied if the game had ended, you know, halfway through its entire story. And now we're hit with the prospect of a jump up in price to $70 games for the next gen. That gamble is even a little bit more. Now, I'm personally surprised by the amount of support coming from the gaming community regarding the price increase of next gen games, saying that it's long overdue. I've even seen multiple people make the claim that now publishers will do away with microtransactions because they're getting that extra $10 for the game up front. No. That's not going to happen. Now, I understand that with inflation, games should be up over $100 by now, but I personally think that games in the 90s were overpriced rather than games now being underpriced. I do think that there's a place for large, all-encompassing games that can charge a premium because the experience and payoff is just worth that much. The problem is that there's a ton of games that have no place being there. Nintendo is infamous for not adequately discounting their games that are lacking in content. Why is Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze more expensive than Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild? Why? With the massive expansion of indie games, the market has become extremely diverse, especially along the price spectrum, which I think will only continue to expand in the coming generations. There is nothing more satisfying than paying $10 for a game that is always your go-to. For me, that game is Rocket League. It doesn't have a massive story or anything like that, and I don't feel like I have to keep putting money into it needlessly. Granted, I have bought it on 3 different platforms, but it is my happy place when I want to sit down and just play a couple of rounds. And there's something coming from EA this year that I think will continue to scratch that itch. Star Wars Squadrons. It received a ton of hype when it was leaked, and people seemed thrilled when they saw the gameplay footage. Then in the least EA move in EA history, they dropped the bomb that the game was only going to be $40 at launch. What surprised me was that people then chilled to it, assuming that it was going to be a half-baked game or lacking in some sort of content because of the price point. You know, maybe it's multiplayer only, or there's going to be a ton of microtransactions. It made me a little sad. Maybe I'm just optimistic, but I think that the $40 price point for games is a magical spot to be, and it has every right to be as good as a $60 game. Sometimes I prefer a slimmed down, easy to access, you know, jump in, jump out type of game that doesn't come with all the bloat and the extra stuff that I feel obligated to throw myself into. And I know that I'm not the perfect sampling of gamers when it comes to stuff like this, because I do have a very nuanced way of appreciating games that is not too common for people my age or gamers as a whole. So I decided to put the question out to my friends who follow me on Instagram and see what they thought. I was pretty surprised by how universal the response was. My amazingly supportive wife started us off. She said, "If Edith Finch was 3 times longer, I'd be a happy girl." Now, this is a story for another video I'm working on, but What Remains of Edith Finch is one of my wife's favorite games of all time, but it is so unfortunately short for how magical it is. Philosophy chimed in with, "I think Death Stranding is an example of needlessly long, and Detroit Become Human is a good example of what to aim for. But then again, if the point of making a story-based game is to highlight the graphics and script, the length of the story may not be as relevant as the emotional response that game may invoke throughout the experience. Similar to films, James Cameron is known for long, drawn-out scripts, but he's one of the best because his movies invoke an emotional experience that you won't forget." Now, I haven't played Death Stranding, but I've heard the same from a lot of people who have. But keying in on emotion is a good point. Finding the balance between action and story and cinematics and length of the game is a fine balancing act. Cruxer agreed. "A short game can be just as effective as a long one, while some long games can seem overly tedious if not done right. You need that balance of progressing the story with a cinematic and make it powerful, with a ton of gameplay in between." I Am Milks, my English stunt double, added some context. "Longer the better for me. However, there's the question of open world versus linear. An open world game can feel so much longer due to side missions and loot, whereas a linear story can outstay its welcome. Having just finished The Last of Us, I was happy with the length of the game. I was ready for it to be finished. Whereas Days Gone, I was begging for more, even though it was twice as long as The Last of Us. It can also be down to the quality of production. A short game can feel full and complete, and a long game an utter slog." I really want to be able to start using the phrase utter slog in my everyday life. But Matt brings up a good point of linear versus open world, 2 very different approaches to narrative style games. Beach Pizza Gaming added to that. "I like a good linear story-based game to be 12 to 20 hours. I start to lose interest after that unless it has some open world thrown in. I consider Days Gone a story-based game, but I had no issues taking 60 hours to finish it because there was so much to do." Well, looks like I need to play Days Gone, I guess. And another thing is developers adding options to streamline the story versus expanding with side quests and open world segments adds a lot of options for the player. Chronicles of a Gamer expanded with some examples. "The length doesn't matter as long as it's interesting and grabs my attention. If it's drawn out to add length, then it's literally just dragging along, and those are the worst games. Red Dead Redemption 2 is a long game if you do everything, but if you just follow the story, it's not that long, and it at least holds your interest. The Witcher 3 is another great long game. However, a game like Nier Automata was painfully long and burning." The Jinx Syndicate added, "I think it's not a matter of time. There are long games that become short and short games that become eternal." I first read this as eternal being a bad thing, but now I think it's actually a compliment. Dad Dude 89 comes from the exact same spot that I'm in. "As for shorter games, I'm all for them, especially if they are budget priced. I simply don't have time to play through too many 30+ hour story games." Exactly my feelings. Exactly my feelings. Exactly my feeling. To cap it off, GameNight.tv brought up a good point. "I think games would be better served if story-based single-player games and social multiplayer games diverged more, in the same way film and TV diverged when the entertainment industry matured. They serve different needs, have different formats, and require different production and business models." I do think that this is going to happen more in the next generation of games. With the proliferation of free-to-play multiplayer games and the appearance of more specialized budget games like Star Wars Squadrons, the days of all-encompassing massive titles that serve every purpose, I think, are mostly behind us, you know, aside from like Halo Infinite and stuff like that. I also asked opinions on episodic games. It was universally panned, which is unfortunate because I have a prediction that that approach will become more widely used in the upcoming generation. Think of the massive film sagas that were filmed over the last 20 years. Studios pushed for multi-film contracts and even shot multiple films simultaneously to cut down on production costs and overhead. Now, as games are nearing $150 million to produce, I imagine publishers wanting to streamline costs and squeeze as much profit out of specific properties. Right now, you sometimes have developers building an entire game engine, recording VO, capturing motion, you know, building entire worlds for the better part of a decade to release one $60 game and possibly a DLC pack. Imagine a story-based game that's constantly evolving, or is developed as 3 10-hour self-contained stories that are released 6 months apart from each other. Now, I didn't divulge that in my Instagram post, but the idea of episodic games was not received very well, aside from a comment or two about enjoying Life is Strange, which I think, if done similarly, games can be a rewarding experience in that format. So what do you think? Are games too long? Are they too short? Are they both? Are you too short? Go to your doctor. Would you be open to trilogy style game releases? Or do you like it just the way it is? That's just the way it is. Some things will never change. If you don't already, please subscribe. I'm putting out videos about once every week or two until I get my rhythm. It's super fun. I'm a busy man. Subscribe, show your support, follow me on Instagram and Twitter. Tell a friend, phone a friend. Tell them about this YouTube thing. That new guy talks about video games, not like the other guys or girls. What are we talking about? That's just the way it is. Things will never be the same. Yay! Yeah, games. Challenge everything. Longer the better for me. I can do a Liverpool accent only. An open world game. All right. Cheers.